Welcome, this is Jim, host of the Faith Influencer podcast, where we're going to dive into discussions on faith's role in everyday life, from navigating blended families to overcoming challenges. I'm a husband, a father, a Bible teacher, an advocate for applying faith to everyday life. So tune in as I share personal stories, valuable insights, and practical wisdom. This is Jim Cunningham. Welcome back to Faith Influencer. I'm excited about today, and I'm a little afraid to go and deal with the subjects we're going to deal with. We're going to talk about 6 ways to level up your game today. So let me state the obvious. Here's the obvious. The obvious is that I'm talking to blended families. Blended families means we're dealing with remarriage. This is your next marriage. This is your second marriage, for some of you, third marriage, or wherever you are. So if you're going to remarry, how are we going to make sure that the stuff that happened the first time doesn't happen now? I'm talking about just your part of it. How are you going to make sure that you've leveled up and got rid of those negatives and those things that you overlooked in your marriage, all of that stuff? How are we going to make sure that you're up in your game in all of this? That's what I want to talk about. So we're going to talk about things like personal growth. We're going to talk about up in your game in the bedroom. We're going to talk about leveling up in your appearance. We're going to look at all of those things. So hang with me. There are 6 of them, and we're going to work our way through them. Now, I got to say that I'm a big football fan, and every time you're watching a football game and there's a bad play, guess what you know? They're getting ready to have another play. Or they have a bad game. Well, they're going to have another game, and it can be better the next time. Or they had a bad season, they can have a better season next time. Well, that's where we are when we've gone through a divorce and we're coming together, this blended family we're talking about, this new marriage. You get to have another season. You get to have a better game this time. So how is your game? How are you working on your game? Why do people think, help me with this, why do people think that they can remarry and bring the same old tired game that they had in their first marriage into their new marriage, and it's going to be any different? It's not going to be different. It's going to be the same. You're going to go down the same path. You're going to fall into the same rut. You're going to have the same struggles. So let's talk about how we can level up. So if you're in agreement, here we go. We're going to jump right into it. Now, emotional readiness is always at the beginning of this. We're talking about, as you're entering into this, you're going to do some self-reflection. Where did you drop the ball? Where did you go wrong? Processing that in your mind, processing your past experiences, embracing the need to change. And not just that, but your willingness to change. We need to lay all that on the table. We're not going to be content with the way it was before. I know every single person who's stepping into a new marriage, your next marriage, you're remarrying, without exception, anyone I've ever talked about said they want it to be different. This time is going to be better. You said that, right? I said that. This time is going to be better. I'm not going to do that anymore. Those things you felt guilty that didn't contribute to a strong marriage, you're not going to do that in this marriage. You have a new partner. You have a new sense of responsibility, a new sense of commitment. You even have a new excitement and a new joy because you get a new chance. And so you're willing to make some changes. Are you really ready to make some changes? Well, we're going to test that. And I'm going to confess to you where I needed to make a change. When I went back and did some reflection like I'm asking you to do, to make sure that I was leveled up for my new marriage and new blended family, I went back and did some reflection and asked myself this question. So what were some things in my life that contributed to me going through a divorce? What were some things that contributed to that? I had to get real honest about it, and it wasn't difficult for me. I knew some areas that I needed to work on, but one in particular, and this is not easy for me, and that is the area of vulnerability. I was not willing to be vulnerable. But I've got to tell you, if you're going to give yourself to someone else, you've got to be vulnerable. But I knew that I was putting up walls, and I was not willing to be vulnerable. But to be close, I had to bring those walls down. So entering into a new relationship, I knew I had to work on my own vulnerability so that my wife could know my heart, so that my wife could know me, and I didn't have these walls. So vulnerability was one of those things I reflected on. What about you? What are those things that you need to deal with that were contributors in your first marriage that you don't want to bring into this one? So here we go, 6 ways to level up. Number 1, up your game in your active communication. Now, this is going to go together with everything else we do. As a matter of fact, you can talk about upping your game in the bedroom, which we're going to talk about. You can talk about upping your game in personal growth, all these other areas. Communication is one of the foundational keys for all of that. So we got to get better at the communication aspect of it. Now, all family psychologists and sociologists will tell you that women are better at communication than men. However, if my wife were sitting in here and we were doing this together and we had this conversation, you know what she'd say? She'd say, not in our marriage. She'd say, in our marriage, I'm way more open to communication than she is. So it's not always the case that women are better at communication, but most of the time that is the case. So, by the way, that's something that she says she's worked on, that she's had to work on, was to communicate a little bit better. So let's talk about that because that becomes the key for everything else. Active participation in communication means active participation in listening. Guys, here's my dad. This is exactly what my dad would do. We would come home in the evening. We always played sports. But when we finally made it home in the evening after practice and all of that, and my brother and I were sitting on the couch and we were playing or doing whatever, and mom and dad were in the living room and dad was sitting over there in the corner in his recliner with the lamp next to it, and mom was sitting in the chair next to his, and she'd want to talk. He would talk with a newspaper in front of his face. He would talk as she would ask him questions, communicating while he was reading the newspaper. Or he would talk while he was watching TV, not looking at her, but looking at the TV and nodding his head. That's not communication. That's what a lot of you do, but that's not the kind of communication I'm talking about. So let me give you some tips for active communication. Number 1, pay attention. I mean, come on, pay attention. How do I know you're paying attention if you're talking to me? Because I have your eye contact. We're maintaining eye contact. Don't you hate it when you're talking to someone and they don't look at you? They're not paying attention. They're looking off. They're looking around. That's what my dad did. You know what that says? I don't really care about talking to you. I don't really care about communicating. So active communication means pay attention. Then it means don't interrupt. Active communication means you listen without interrupting. How many of you cannot get through a conversation without interrupting the other person? That's not active communication. That's not healthy communication. That's what so many people do. I work with a lot of young guys, and a lot of them are newly married, and they tell me this is how they communicate. They yell at each other. Like, that's what is that? That's not communication. That's not healthy for a marriage. They just get in this habit where they raise their voices and yell at each other. No one finishes the thought before the other one takes it over. That's not active communication. You've got to get out of that. Don't interrupt. And then the next thing is show that you understand when you're talking to someone. You know how to tell someone that you're really listening? By paraphrasing back to them what they said to you. That's active communication. Try that one on. And then here's another one, ask questions. I think this is one of the great secrets to life that people never think about is the ability to ask questions. I'm talking about asking questions about what they're saying to you. If they make a comment to you, go a little deeper and ask a question. If I'm talking to a client and they say, I want to build a house, I'm going to say, well, tell me about it. How big is it? What color is it? How many bedrooms are in it? Ask questions. Ask questions when your spouse is talking to you and they're sharing things with you. Dig deeper. Ask questions. Learn to ask good questions because it allows them to know that you are paying attention. Active communication. Let me give you one of these others. This is a pet peeve. How about that single word answer when you ask a question to your spouse. They ask you a question and you respond like, yeah, yes, okay, all right, sure. Single word answers mean that you're not involved in this conversation. It's a one-sided conversation. So we have to start there, but you're going to see why in a minute. So 6 ways to level up: active communication. That's where you begin. All right, here's the next one. Let's up our game in personal growth. I don't have to spend a lot of time here. You know what I'm talking about, personal growth. There's always room to grow. Buy some books. Listen to some podcasts. You know what? I still remember it. As a matter of fact, I looked for it the other day and I couldn't find it. But I got this little book that's entitled How to Be Happy Though Married. I thought the title was great. And I bought that little book because I'd gone through a divorce and I was remarrying, and I wanted to read and up my game a little bit on my personal growth. So How to Be Happy Though Married. It was a great little book and gave me some great ideas. Up your game in your personal growth. Personal growth is a lifelong process. You're making your mind sharper. You're getting rid of some of these weaknesses. Supplement all of that with reading and podcasts. What about that guy who says to me, and I've talked to so many of them, and he's kind of like a slug, if you know what I'm talking about, and I don't mean that in a good way. That guy who says, well, I just don't like to read. I don't like to listen to stuff. That's not true. He's sitting in front of the couch all weekend watching the TV. Up your game. Start reading. Start listening to podcasts. Go to groups of men's groups or women's groups where they support each other and they have fun. Quit making excuses like I don't like to read or I don't like to listen to stuff. You know what happens? When you start upping your game in self-improvement, your spouse knows that you have a deeper commitment to the relationship and you're trying to get better. Why not give them that satisfaction that you're trying to get better? Self-improvement is important and it's big. And that means you're growing together. Do some podcasts together. Even if it's something that has nothing to do with relationships or marriage, just something that you do together. Personal growth, up your game. And then here's the last one I want to give this for this time together. And it is up your game in your physical appearance. Level up in physical attraction. So let's spend a little bit of time here, and I want to jump in some areas that's going to be a little touchy to some of you, and that's okay because I'm talking about things I see that men and women say when they're asked why their marriage didn't work, or why they're struggling in their marriage, or why they have eyes that are wandering away from their spouse in their marriage and they're no longer as committed, why they're struggling with lust, why they're struggling with all of that. I hear all of that on the marriage counseling side. And so I'm just going to lay it out there when it comes to physical attraction. Now, you got to understand, and next time we'll get more into this when I'm going to talk about upping your game in the bedroom. But let me say something about physical attraction here. Physical attraction is an important part of your relationship and of your marriage. It's a great thing to be physically attracted to your spouse, but sometimes that physical attraction begins to go away. Now, as bad as I hate to say it, all marriage counselors say that the physical attraction that you have when you get married may not always be the same throughout your whole marriage, and it doesn't mean your marriage is bad. There is a tendency, because you've been with someone for a long time, that physically they don't attract you as much as they always did, but it doesn't mean it has to go away. But let's talk about that. When you work on your health, you know what that does for you? When you work on your physical appearance, you know what that does? It makes you more vibrant. It makes you more active. It makes you more mentally awake. It makes you stronger when you're working on that stuff. When you're working on your weight, when you're working on that appearance. So let me spend a little minute there. Don't let yourself go. Don't let yourself go physically. Now, I know there are reasons that people do that medically, or that it happens medically. I know that sometimes people going through depression gain weight. I know sometimes there are certain medical conditions that cause people to gain weight. I know there are certain even drugs or medicine that causes people to have a tendency to gain weight. Those medical conditions or those kinds of things or that you have no control over, I'm not talking about those things. So you don't have to come in and say, but I can't. No, I'm not talking about those things. I'm talking about those things we do have control over, including our excuses. That's the things I'm talking about. Please work on your physical appearance. We talk so much about your mental and your spiritual. We don't talk much about our physical. Work on your physical appearance. Do you know when people lose weight? Now, this saddens me, to be honest with you. Here's when people tend to lose weight. People lose weight when they are about to get married, and people lose weight the most after they go through a divorce. Now, when you hear that, what does that make you think? Well, it makes me think that they want to be attractive because they have a new person in their life and they're going to get married. And it makes me think, now that I've gone through a divorce, I'm going to need to be attractive again for someone else. But you know what question that raises? Why were you not concerned about maintaining that attraction when you were married? What happened to that? What happened to showing that appeal to your spouse while you were married? Here's what a husband says. Now, let me dive into this piece of it for a moment. Men and women don't think the same. We're going to talk about that in the next podcast. Men and women don't think the same. Men are more visual. That's just how men are. God made us that way. We are more visual. Now, sometimes I hated that because my dad, just to be honest with you, he's in heaven now, but my dad was one of these guys whose eyes wandered. I mean, I hated it, but I saw it all the time. If an attractive woman would walk by, when she walked by, I would catch him looking at her. He had wandering eyes. I saw that, and I really didn't like it because I thought it was disrespectful to my mother. But men are visual. Men are visual like that. What happens then in a relationship, let's just continue with this, when the wife becomes very comfortable in the relationship and she lets herself go and she gains all of this weight. It's not a medical condition. It's a LB condition. It's a lazy butt condition. It's a lack of discipline condition. What happens? Well, your husband, who is visual, might lose a little physical attraction for you. Now, listen, I didn't say that your husband's saying, I don't love you the same. I didn't say that at all. I didn't say that your husband is saying, I don't love you as much. I didn't say that at all. What I said was, there's a difference between love and attraction. And there are a lot of people who can make themselves unattractive physically. I'm asking you to up your game on this. Since I'm mentioning wives and women, let's talk about that. How about when your husband gets home and when he walks in the door and you haven't washed your hair and you haven't worked on whatever you're wearing and your appearance and you look raggedy, and he comes home to raggedy. What happens when he walks in and there you are and it's nothing to look at? And I know what some of you are saying to me right now. Here's what you're saying. You're saying, well, he ought to love me just how I am. No, are you not listening? I didn't say it had anything to do with love. He will say to you, I still love you the same, but there's a difference between love and attraction. I'm saying when he walks in, that's not an attractive sight. Work on that. Work on how you look. How about you, sir? How about you, man? We're the same way. How about us? How about your face? How about your hair? How about that same old greasy, dirty hat? You know what women say they hate when it comes to physical attraction with men? Not just a big fat belly. Women aren't as visual as men. Okay, they're not as visual, so it's not quite the same. But I'm saying that a wife doesn't mind looking at a man who takes care of himself. All wives are going to say, I'd be okay with that. But here's one. I was doing some research on the whole subject since I work in this area of counseling and blended families and marriage and all this stuff. And I was surprised, but here was one area that women said that they hated that their husband doesn't pay attention to. You know what it was? Dirty fingernails. Dirty fingernails. I'm talking about dirt underneath your fingernails where you can see the dirt and the grease underneath your fingernails. That's not attractive to your wife. So here's your wife. She comes home. We've already talking about her being raggedy. So she's like, okay, I'm going to work on being raggedy. Now you work on your fingernails. How about that, guy? How about working on your physical attraction? So, I mean, we all have some things we can deal with here. How about getting rid of the excuses of why you have to go through so many drive-thrus? I think one of the biggest contributors to physical attraction is a McDonald's drive-thru. Would you agree with that? Or how about a Sonic drive-thru or Wendy's drive-thru or Dunkin' Donut drive-thru or whatever drive-thru? Cut some of that out. How about late night snacks? One of my guys at the office who's trying to lose weight told me the other day that he woke up at 10:30 at night and was hungry. So you know what he did? He threw discipline out the window and he went and had 9 Oreos. He's probably going to listen to this. Yes, I'm calling you out, but I won't tell everyone your name. 9 Oreos. You know, let's up our game when it comes to physical attraction. Now, let me tell you what's going to happen. When you work on your physical attraction, by the way, you say, well, you know, I don't have someone to work out with or whatever. Well, walk around the block. I mean, start there. Walk your dog. How about this? How about you and your spouse walking around the block together? Do it together. What a great place to have a communication and talk. My wife and I, almost every morning, we walk around the block, walking our dog, and it's not for the dog's sake. It's for our sake. One, it just gets blood flowing. It's good for you, and it's a great place to have communication. Try that. Start there. Here's somewhere else you can start. Go to your closet and start throwing out all the crap. Start throwing out the things that don't contribute to what you would like to have in your physical appearance. But then think about the benefit. I think about as you get older, as we get older, I think about you're going to have grandkids someday and you're going to want to keep up with them to some extent. I love it when I see a grandfather or a grandmother who's taking care of themselves and they're confident in themselves and they still look good and they haven't let their appearance go and they can keep up with their grandkids. They can go on trips with them. They take them to the zoo. They get down on the floor with them. They throw the football with them because they took care of their physical being and their physical appearance. So when we're talking about leveling up, upping our game, making sure that this new relationship is not going to be like the old relationship. These are some areas that I want you to consider. And next time, we're going to pick it up from here and we're going to dig a little deeper and give you a few other reasons maybe to be offended at me on this podcast. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.